This podcast represents my opinion and the opinion of my guests. This is not medical advice, and I am not establishing a patient-physician relationship with any listener. The content here should not be taken as medical advice. The content here is for informational purposes only. And because each patient is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions you may have.
Welcome back, everyone. We are here for another exciting episode of the Not Your Doc podcast.
Howdy.
I'm your host, Vanessa, and we're joined here today by Mr. Not Your Doc himself, Dr. Charles Tadros. How are you, Dr. Tadros?
Very well. Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. Another gorgeous day here in St. Louis.
I know, yeah.
And we should introduce Seth. Seth is our producer, our editor and producer. We should say hi to him occasionally. And because he's always here. He's always been here.
Yeah.
People don't know that because they don't have any video of us yet. Seth,
Say hey, Seth.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
I think so.
All right.
Sure, yeah.
No, it's nice to get a little recognition. I forget that I'm here sometimes, too. Just back and forth. No, I love sitting through these conversations. I learn a lot every week.
Seth's handiwork is all over our tape. I call it
Our
tape,
tape.
even if there's no tape.
It's all over our phonograph.
Pretty soon we're going to move up to burnt CDs.
Yes, right.
I don't know what they call it. Our file, our
8
audio,
tracks.
our audio file.
Our audio file. Yeah, no, for sure. And the design of our like what you see when you go to YouTube, all that kind of stuff.
That's
Seth
right.
is all over this. Thank
Yep.
you, Seth. You've been awesome.
Well, thank you.
All right, so today we're going to go for another non-medical, but I still think highly relevant topic. I like the non-medical ones because we get to share our opinions based on our experience. And, Dr. Tadros and I talk for hours and hours about this kind of stuff anyway. So it's good to turn into a finished product. But okay, so it's a highly relevant topic, as I said, and I think it affects many people in life. And the topic is marriage.
Amen.
Marriage. It's what brings us here together today.
If you know your movie
If
references.
you know your Princess Bride references.
Right.
So I think everyone in our listening audience will have some familiarity with marriage, like whether they have been married themselves or are married or are close friends or family with someone who is married or has been married. I think we've all had some level of exposure to marriage, and many of us have strong feelings about what constitutes a good or bad marriage. Mm-hmm. I think many people also have strong feelings about whether marriage itself is even worthwhile. Whether it's because they think marriage is an outmoded religious convention or it's just not necessary for a happy life. Mm-hmm. Some people think that long-term partnership and cohabitation or living together long-term is just as good, socially, financially, relationally. Today, Dr. Tadros and I are going to take somewhat different sides of this issue. I think we're going to have a lot of overlap, but
We will.
I do think that initially the way we break down on this is actually going to surprise people a little bit, considering our demographics.
It's okay. I think hopefully we modeled. It's interesting. Because we brought this topic up just a couple of days ago, I've thought more. Dropping off to sleep, waking up in the shower. I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to write this down, and I need to write this. So all of a sudden, it's like, oh, maybe I need to modify this. So I'm glad that we brought this up. It made me think more deeply.
Awesome, I love that. I think that's the goal of all these talks.
Amen.
Okay, so I'll start with my own position, and that is that I think marriage. Both the social convention and the formal commitment itself is a good thing and not an outdated religious practice that we don't have any use for anymore. And I'm even going to go as far as to say that I think it is better than long-term cohabitation or long-term partners living together. Mm-hmm. I think it's better for long-term happiness, relationship satisfaction, and financial stability. My opinion is built on my own personal experience with marriage as well as on data about marriage in the United States. And I'll go into each of those things later, but I want Dr. Tadros to introduce his point of view as well.
Well, sure. Thank you. We're going to be talking about marriage kind of in the traditional Western sense.
Yeah.
So that's important to kind of define that, because people may define marriage not just relationships, long-term committed relationship, but marriage. We're going to talk about marriage specifically. We're going to we'll touch on several other things because we're comparing and contrasting.
Sure.
This point, counterpoint. And we'll explain kind of where our backgrounds are. As a physician, not only have I been married for 30 years, but as a physician, I've listened to lots of couples. Oftentimes, as a primary care physician, I took care of entire families, extended families, but oftentimes I would take care of the spouses, et cetera. And the vast majority of time, marriages work only because, as we know, people make them work. It takes a lot of energy. It takes maturity and a lot of energy.
Very intentional.
Very intentional and consistent over time. So even if it's inconsistent, but it still takes over time.
Right.
But I approach it from a different perspective. Most of us, first marriages are young, probably typically less than age 30. Certainly marriage is one of the sources of joy and one of the sources of angst and unhappiness.
For sure.
So what I've approached is from partly what you say, but I also I'll quote unquote give people permission. It doesn't really come from me, obviously, but I allow people to say different things that may not be acceptable to say to their partner, et cetera, to be able to say it out loud and not get the shock feeling from their physician. And I want people to think about their marriage differently than whenever they first were married, and I think that strengthens their beliefs in their marriage, or really makes them think that it's acceptable to start questioning if marriage is right for them or was ever right for them. And that's sometimes scary for people to even broach that, so to their own mind, let alone say it out loud.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I approach it from somewhat different angle, but we should start off by saying kind of our own histories and our parents' histories.
Yeah, for sure. I'll start with that. So I'm the product of a set of parents that have been married for 36 years. So they got married before they had me. And both sets of their parents, who are amazingly, still with us, have both been married for 55 years plus. So I come from a long line of long marriages. I'm also married to a man whose parents have been married for a long time as well. And he's got, aunts and uncles that are in long-term marriages too. Eric and I are going on our 6th year of marriage.
Congrats.
Together. Yes. And that's taken a lot of work and determination and persistence, and we'll get more into that later. But in general, I've had lots of exposure to not just happy marriages and like couples who are just like, oh man, they're so great together, but hard fought marriages. I've seen, especially my parents modeled conflict resolution and growing through different seasons together, and working on maintaining their friendship together more than anything else. So I think in general, I have a high regard for marriage in general. I think that it is a good and healthy thing, and that it can lead people to be happier, more productive, and more stable over the course of their lives.
Yes.
So
wonderful.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to hear when people are been married for years and are still fans of it.
Absolutely.
My parents are long deceased. I was just calculating this. Both of my father was born in 1927, and my mother in 1993 or 1933. She's not a baby. She's so my parents have been. They both died at age 65, but they were both married for 30 years before my father passed away. He passed away first. So I come from a Christian Arab culture where the Coptic Orthodox marriages, nobody divorced.
Right.
They could live in misery. They could poke each other's eyes out, but nobody got a divorce. It wasn't. I wasn't taught that. We moved to the United States whenever I was about 7 or 8 years old, and we joined the Christian church, the Episcopal Church here in Southern Illinois, where I grew up. That was a big deal about marriage and nuclear family and kids, et cetera. So that certainly was not necessarily directly taught, but certainly was modeled, just like you said.
Yeah.
I myself have just celebrated 30 years, so I'm up there with my parents now.
Yay. Yay!
Thank
God
you.
bless Julie.
Yes. She was excited that I was going to do this podcast. No, she wasn't. No, she wasn't. But
to impart your great wisdom.
That's right. So I also and I have brothers who also have been married for many years. Also, I'm the eldest of three boys. And also, we have modeled the same thing: long-term committed to a relationship that is filled with trust, a voluntary commitment from our youth that we stick by because we help it grow.
Right.
And that's, I think, what we need to talk about: the trust and the growth, and the voluntary nature of all this.
Yeah.
When we commit in front of people, sometimes there's civil unions or civil marriages in front of the justice of peace, but we say it in front of people for a reason. And we commit voluntarily for a reason.
Right.
And then the question about trust, not just trust for the day or the week or the month, but for decades. And as we all know, it's hard to win trust, and it's very easy to lose it.
For sure.
For me, marriage is not equal to, and people just automatically, in my young, foolish mind, I won't tell you how embarrassed I should be, but marriage is not equal. It's not the same thing as having kids.
Yeah.
Not the same thing as unconditional love.
Right.
Not initially, at least. I think that's the part that grows.
Yeah.
Unconditional support.
Right.
My wife thinks I'm a doofus. Unconditionally admired. It doesn't automatically rev up all your engines every time you see your spouse partner.
Yeah.
You don't get tinglies all over. It's not automatically mean financial stability.
Right.
It does not automatically mean that your extended families are going to meld in harmony.
Yes.
So a lot of stuff that people automatically hope or assume is not necessarily part of marriage. A lot of times we want this to be part of marriage. So that's kind of where I come from. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I also, come from a Christian background where getting married was certainly the goal that was modeled for us. I mean, and definitely raised in a culture where, sex before marriage and living together before marriage was not permissible either. So not that culture, those rules kept me from doing any of those things, but still, just the getting married was definitely always highlighted as a good thing to do and certainly a goal. And the reasons for that were definitely about companionship, the idea in partnership, the idea that two is better than one, right? And that you can get more done working with another person. You can feel more fulfilled working with another person. You can split duties, household duties, finances, taking care of children. All of that is so much easier to do when there's more than one of you. I also think too that, while like in my immediate church family and culture, divorce was not, permissible or encouraged. I knew a lot of my peers in school were children with divorced parents. And this was, in the 90s and early 2000s, and a lot of my friends went through, really hard times when their parents divorced when they were young or even older. Divorce was certainly a pretty big trauma. So that, I definitely kind of saw things from that perspective too. I think that I completely agree with you that, marriage is not unconditional love, financial stability. It is not automatically great sex. It is not automatically happy children. It's not even children. It's not even owning a home. It's so much more basic than that. And I think that goes back to, partnership and trust and belonging. Part of my reason for feeling so pro-marriage is because, as we know, loneliness levels are just totally on the rise, worldwide, but definitely in the United States. There's a recent study that says that, over half of adults are lonely. And, the age groups that are the loneliest are the youngest among us. So people under 40 tend to be very lonely. And, basically, older than that, and especially baby boomers, 65 plus, tend to be much less lonely. And one of the differences between those two categories is that younger people tend not to be married and in established families and in close long-term relationships. And older people tend to have had the benefit of living in that lifestyle for a long time. So that's certainly one of the things that appeals to me about marriage.
As part of our premarital counseling many decades ago, we were handed a book. It's We Marry Strangers, and I've thought about that on and off for more than a few years, and it's true. And that's actually when I was a physician, not only at the ketamine clinic but as a primary care physician. A lot of what I saw as people spoke, you could tell that. Some of the unwritten, unsaid, obviously at the time unsaid assumptions about self or about the other person, expectations were way off base.
Right.
We were not true to begin with, and certainly did not grow into that marriage. These became truths later. So we meet each other in one point in our life, and space and time, and level of maturity, and a level of financial debt or freedom. But we're all in motion. We're all changing. Everything changes us. Death of somebody else, getting a job, growing older, injuries, even having children, finances, economy. Lots of stuff changes, and some of the changes are permanent. And that's one of the important things that I had to learn along the way, is that that I met my wife at a certain point in our lives that was I saw her as a wonderful human being, and I saw her family and her family interactions with each other, and they're taking care of her great aunt, and that struck my heartstrings as something that I think would be important for me to be a part, to help out with, to be witness to have my children grow into that type of family. And I was fortunately correct, and it was not a show. My in-laws are those types of wonderful people. But I also recognize that it took me many years to realize that I was changing. My core Chuck Tadros is still there, but I change. For the better or for worse.
Sure.
I change, and so does Julie, and so does everybody else around me. And that's not something I quite grew up with. The kind of some of the strict nature, some of the perfectionism, some of the other things make me some of the anxieties make you kind of somewhat rigid.
Yeah.
And how to be yourself but be flexible. And I think that would solve a lot of our problems, both emotionally, health-wise, physically, health-wise, and socially, social health. Is that ability to have values that you stick to, that are important to you and your from your past, and the ones that you add to yourself, that, even if they're not your parents' values or grandparents' values, but also be flexible, so you allow other people to grow, who affect you and you affect them.
One thing that I was hearing you say, when you're talking about the things that, first attracted to you about Julie, how she was with her family, how her family interacted, how she took care of her aunt. Those struck me as like very caveman instincts to want to pick a mate that's going to be a good caretaker and secure and loyal and helpful. And it makes me smile thinking that humans have been picking their mates that way for thousands of years. And that's exactly what I saw in Eric too when we first met. He's from a big family. He's got a bunch of nieces and nephews. He's amazing with kids. That was one of the first things that I noticed about him, other than he's hilarious in the life of the party, which is a great contrast to me, who I can be very rigid, perfectionistic, uptight. He loves to have a good time. He's a go with the flow kind of person. And I knew that I needed a lot of those qualities to sort of temper my intensity going forward in life. So, and the other thing that you were talking about that really resonated with me as well too, is that there's, sometimes we can go into marriage expecting it to be a very specific thing. And Eric and I also had premarital counseling where we talked through, a lot of the issues that we thought we would run into: finances, decisions about having kids, how you would parent, how you want to spend your free time, all that kind of stuff. It's hard to really prepare for those things and have those discussions in a vacuum.
Yes.
You can put them out there at first, but it really only until you encounter it in real life do you start seeing what the relationship is made of and what you're made of individually. And honestly, like the first couple of years of our marriage were really, really difficult because of that. I think I mean, I can't speak to, necessarily what was going on in his head, but I definitely what kept bumping up against this realization that like I had all of these unwritten expectations and unstated expectations that I didn't even know where they came from at first. But upon, closer inspection, I realized that I expected Eric to be a husband in all of the exact same ways that my dad was a husband to my mom.
Yeah.
So, I wanted him to be handy and a leader and proactive and take initiative on projects. And that's just, those are just wonderful qualities that my dad had, but they're not necessarily the same strengths and qualities that Eric has.
That's right.
And it took us a lot of conflict to sort of realize that like we had to come to a decision point where we going to like love each other and build a partnership based on who we actually were, or were we gonna decide that we just can't possibly fit together and we're gonna turn and go opposite directions. That was certainly what we bumped up against. And honestly, it was the formal structure of marriage, which I hope we can talk about next, kind of like the symbolism of marriage, that kept us persevering through those really difficult times.
Yeah. I have two daughters that are recently married. One married about two years ago, and the other one just married about a month ago. And essentially what I've asked, when my daughters talked about marriage and stuff, I asked them, is he a good guy? And this is Ryan and Andrew. I'm talking to you guys. And that's all I asked. I didn't ask about anything else. Yeah. Simple statement. And they unabashedly said yes without hesitation. That was good enough for me. Yeah. So we had raised our children well enough so that whenever they told me that this is the guy for them for life, that's all I needed to know. So that ability to think that somebody's a good person, because that's what it comes down to whenever you're arguing once you are married.
Yeah, for sure.
Is that you have to see through the crap in order to see the good person behind it.
Yeah.
And that's certainly what I see with my wife, and that's always what I see with my wife. No matter whether I disagree with her a little bit or a lot, or totally agree with her, and I see that she. And I get weepy at times, but that she's unwavering in how good she is, so I think that's the root of any good relationship, especially marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, like feeling mushy as well. Shout out to my husband. I was going through a really, really hard time with my mental health when we, the year we got married and also the year afterwards. I mean, I was not doing well. There were, serious, deep, dark times of depression. And, Eric was in the position a lot where he just felt completely overwhelmed by what I was going through and maybe not like equipped to do something about it. I think many men tend to want to be fixers in any given situation like this. If it's someone they love, they see suffering. Yes. And they feel like they can't really do anything to end the suffering. That can be extremely, frustrating and discouraging. And, to Eric's great credit, like he stuck it out with me. A lot of times that meant just him being there with me and reassuring me that he loved me despite the challenges I was having or the things I was going through.
The gift and grace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the gift and grace of being present.
Absolutely. But and he's done a lot of work himself too to acquire more language and more skills to help me. Just more emotional intelligence stuff so that we can relate more on that level. So yes, that was really important too.
Yeah, no matter how many degrees I have to my name, I'm a total idiot about a lot of things. So the good thing about marriage for me was that my wife didn't sit me down and give me a book, but she, by example, I learned. Yeah. And she stuck, like you said, just like Eric, she stuck by my side as I was learning. Everything is the hard. I'd never do anything easy, and I usually don't learn the first time. Yeah. Maybe not even the second or third time. Yeah. And it's taken me years to figure that out. Your self-esteem and self-worth and self-image are important to give you structure without being narcissistic, obviously. But to be able to be a little malleable, that flexibility, because you did marry somebody who you think was a good person, and if they're going to say something, that they're probably saying it for a good reason. They're not out to get you.
Sure.
They're not the enemy.
Yeah.
Even though sometimes during fights you think that's the only enemy.
Exactly.
But anyway, so I learned by example, and it takes years and years. And this is some of the stuff I tried to, as I listened to patients and their spouses, I tried to impart bits and pieces of this, or listen for these pieces. And I will ask them, what was it like when you first met? What's the best thing you like about that person? Everybody gets soft for a few seconds. They get soft, no matter how hard the discussion has been about somebody's drinking or anything like that, any issues. They get soft for a few seconds. It's and it shows that they still remember. Yeah,
absolutely. Oh, that's beautiful. So let's talk a little bit now. I think there's, okay, so now in general, I'm referring to this like Pew Research study that we might hit on a couple of times here, but basically the overall point is that, approval ratings for marriage are on the decline, and a lot more people, younger people especially, feel like not only marriage isn't necessary for happiness, but that, being in a long-term partnership is basically just as good as getting married, and maybe even better. Some of that can come from, thinking that it's like an outmoded religious convention, or that they just don't need the formal ceremony and commitment in order to, build a long-term partnership like that together. Personally, for me, I think that the symbolism of, making this like formal contract with one another, with with Eric, with my husband, in front of all of our family, in front of God, and, in front of each other, promising and committing to not quit. Ultimately, that's really what it comes down to. Having that formal structure in place, I really, really think gave us the motivation to persevere through really difficult challenges.
Yes.
It would have been a lot more complicated for us to become divorced, to be unmarried once we were married.
Yes.
And because of that, we had, kind of a little bit of built-in resistance, right? A little built-in friction. So it made it harder for us to give up on that commitment to each other. I'm wondering what you think about that. If the goal is long-term partnership and commitment with another person, does marriage strengthen that?
Well, and I agree with you, and several thousand years of history of multiple cultures where marriage is formalized, and often pretty much in public. A lot of them, not just ceremonial, but ceremonies. It tells us that there's a reason behind that that works. So part of what happens whenever is that you develop commitment to something or somebody else, something bigger than you, something. So that's the first thing. Number two, you learn grit and stick-to-itiveness. You learn about empathy. You say, well, I was a kid and my parents and I had pets. And the answer is there's a big difference between empathy because you have a brother and sister and a pet versus somebody that you're going to have that you're going to share decades with, who eventually will know you better than your parents. I don't think people understand this. I'm now at this point in my life. I've been married. I've been married longer than I've been single. And my wife, knew me within a few years better than my parents because I had not lived at home for many years as I was getting my education, et cetera. So within a few years of her, meeting me and our living together, she knew me better than my parents as an adult. Now they knew me as a kid.
Sure.
So I don't think people understand, or remember, or see that. They don't kind of put two and two together. So I think you're maturing in a different way. You're maturing into a relationship. You're maturing, and this is part. And it's important for society, not only for your faith to if you keep the kids in the church or synagogue or temple and keeping the faith, but also our society, our ability to have stability in terms of taking care of everything from property to take care of children. All that stuff is important for society to grow and to be stable.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to read a little snippet here from this marriage and cohabitation in the U.S. study. The Pew Research Center did this in 2019. It was a pretty extensive study, but they said that. And
you say Pew is not like PU, it's PEW.
PEW, yes.
Right.
Yes, exactly. Pew Research Center. So they actually identified that married adults are more likely than long-term partners who live together, to say that they feel closer to their spouse or partner than to any other adult. So 8 in 10 married adults, 78%, say they feel closer to their spouse than to any other adult in their life. And a much narrower majority of only 55% of people who live together say that they feel the same about their partner. So I think there's some of that plays out in the data, and as far as the closeness that can happen when you add in that symbolic and formal commitment there as well.
I'd be interested in how, what the mean, median, and mode of how long people were married or partnered together. Is it, if you only been partnered 6 months and married versus married 6 months, I suspect a lot, it may be different than somebody, both of them been partnered or married for 30 years.
For sure. I think when I was looking over the methodology of this study, it was kind of all over the place. I mean, not all over the place, but fairly representative of new marriages and older marriages, older people, right. Younger people, all different types of demographics. We'll link to this study in the podcast description so that people can see it as well. So I think that I agree with you about the societal implications, and we were going to talk about this kind of like the macro implications of marriage as well as the micro. Obviously, two people living together, sharing income. They're more likely to be able to buy a house. They're more likely to be able to, save money together when they're living together and sharing resources, which leads to greater wealth overall. There are tax benefits for being married as well. There are, plenty of arguments about whether, long-term partners should have access to those same tax, benefits. But this is, just how it is in the United States, is that married adults have an advantage there. Obviously, having children, fewer people in the United States believe that married people do better at raising children than unmarried people, but support in parenting and raising children is certainly highly approved of and extremely important. And the most likely place that you're going to get that kind of intense support is when the partners are together or married.
Society, there's no doubt, if you were in a neighborhood, in a culture, in a society, in your family, your neighborhood, your city, where there are these conventions, former marriage is supported, there's no doubt that you're going to tend to last longer because of just the automatic support and the modeling that you have around you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk a little bit about like the micro effects. So the positive effects of marriage on families, individuals, and children. Obviously we talked about the stability aspect for children, and modeling those relationships is really important. I wanted to bring up that married people tend to be less lonely. And overall just have a higher satisfaction rate with their personal relationships, not just their marriages, but other personal relationships. Plus higher levels of trust and closeness, over time. And this was true when, even when the data was controlled for all different kinds of demographic factors. So on the whole, married people tend to be more financially secure, happier in their relationships, more trusting, and less lonely. So I think like that's kind of individual level impacts that would argue for it.
What do you think about? Everybody quotes 50% divorce. I haven't looked at if it's been 50%
sure, the
divorce.
Rates,
yeah, it's been decades. Everybody says the same number. I doubt that it's been exactly stable for decades. What do you think? Where do you think that falls into this? If you say all these things, why are there divorces?
Well, I think the arguments for why marriage is good are completely different than the reasons for why divorces occur and why marriages fail. Right?
Oh, really?
Oh, completely.
So it's not just a deficiency of the good stuff that we listed?
Exactly. Yeah, it's not just a deficiency of the stuff that we listed. I think that there are all kinds of reasons that people end up divorcing. Getting married very young, some sort of catastrophe, trauma. Some marriages should end due to violence, abuse, neglect, any of those things. I think that the divorce rate itself is not indicative of whether or not marriage is a good thing.
It's important to differentiate.
Right, exactly. And I don't think that like a fundamentally broken relationship that's headed for divorce can suddenly turn around by adding just like one extra good thing of like going on date nights together, or
yes,
I don't know, any of the other good qualities that we talked about in a marriage.
Well, finances. I mean, children. As
Sure,
we know,
yeah.
you know, the biggest stressors people have, whether that marriage or health, children, finances, children, marriage, in-laws, and then religion. So those are the kind of the biggest, sometimes the biggest joys, but also, of course, whenever it's not going well, they're the biggest stressors for people. Health is in there too, and that includes mental health.
Sure. And I do think it's important to point out too that like the type of marriage that I'm arguing for is not just like marriage, just a contract signed between two people. I don't think like every kind of marriage is better than every kind of long-term partnership or every other type of way of living. We're talking about a kind of what you listed off at the beginning, you know, a consensual, voluntarily joined relationship.
Yes.
That's, you know, two adults that have considered themselves, who know themselves, who are committed to doing their own personal work along the way so that they can manage different seasons of change together.
Yes.
I'm advocating for people to marry who are, or not for people to marry, but for people to approach marriage from the same point of view that they approach, you know, their own mental health or their own, you know, journey to discovery of themselves, right? Like it's a growth process. It's not, there's not an arrival point where all of a sudden, oh, I have a good marriage, or I'm done learning about how this should work.
That's right.
So I think that you know, doesn't show up so much in the statistics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For guys, I'll speak for all guys everywhere at all times.
Do it.
I don't. Of course, I don't.
I've got the whites after you.
Right. No, I don't. But what I've seen, especially for guys who tend to be goal oriented, you know, once I get here, then I can relax and I'm done to finish line. I'll have the award or whatever. And the answer, there's probably nothing in marriage or families where it's done permanently forever and it'll stick to it. You know, it'll stick and you'll get to keep the ribbon and the trophy and you'll never have to backtrack and do it again or do it better. So that's a challenge for a lot of people who are goal oriented, finish line oriented, and motivated that way. And that's the challenge, and certainly a lot of people are not raised that way. So get the A, get the position, get the advanced degree, get the house, get the car, and the answer is. It's important to have goals. It's important to be flexible on how you get to those goals. But also it's important to understand that those are your goals and your ideas and your family that's taught you about these things or you picked up from your family. You're marrying somebody else with totally different family, ideas, ideals, values, goals, etc. A lot of them will overlap with yours, but sometimes not exactly and not in the same time scale. Right. So you want a car, you know, by the end of this month. She may want a car, you know, sometime in the future, whenever you have kids and all this stuff like that. So all these things are very important. I don't think anybody says them out loud until they're in trouble. Yeah. And then after these assumptions that you've made and you kind of bang heads, you go see a counselor, then you finally start seeing, I want stability like you want stability. Yeah. But I wanted to do it. I want to do it with Bitcoin, and you want to do it by slow investing over 30 years. So that's the problem we run into. And sometimes it's not obvious until it's things people have been throwing flaming arrows at each other for a few months to a few years.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think people should consider before marriage? Like how speak to us from your deep experience counseling people and being married yourself.
Well, I don't. Fortunately, I don't. Nobody comes to me as a primary care physician and asks me what to think about before getting married. My first worry is that if they have to ask me, we're in trouble because they should be more secure in their choice and asking somebody to be married than asking their doctor. But anyway. First things I tell this to my daughters in the same way as a dad of daughters, and I grew up with brothers, and so number one, are they a good person? Is the other person a good person? Number two, do you feel like it's a gift? That person is a gift. You could not have worked hard enough. You could not have deserved enough for that person to love you and care for you this much that they're willing to spend their life with you. So number one, are they a good person? Your standards, not my standards. Yeah. Number two, does it feel like you could not have worked hard enough to deserve this marriage? That it's a gift, and those are kind of the two biggest things. Then those are the two big kind of spiritual, metaphysical.
Sure.
The practical stuff, and my wife and I laugh about this. Julie and I laugh about this. I play Monopoly atrociously.
What does that mean? How does one play Monopoly atrociously?
It's because I just slam
go
all
bankrupt?
right. I'll go for broke, and my wife, it drives her bananas because she's good old she's very, very careful with her money, etc.
Yes.
So this is the same way, and I think really, and the interesting about games, it's not just enough I think to write it out with pre-Cana or your premarital stuff.
Yeah.
I think you really need to play games with each other, and not play games, but play board games, etc. Because it gives you a hint about how that person works, whatever. Are they greedy? Do they blow everything the first round? Go for bust, go for broke, become a millionaire or nothing. Some of this stuff.
Are they ruthlessly competitive even when it's someone they love?
Right.
Yeah.
So all these things actually really, really matter, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting way to look at it. But so the first thing is the metaphysical, spiritual, but the next thing is the practical. Just like they try, who likes to pay the bills, who wants to keep control of stuff, will you be willing to share all these things? Kids sooner, later, all that stuff. How are you going to raise them, and what type of faith, if any, all that stuff really makes a big difference. And you're right, until you're faced with that choice, really, not just on paper, you really can't tell them.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that keeps coming to mind for me is the idea of intention. That you should not rush into marriage because you feel these ooey gooey, intense sexual feelings for the other person,
Absolutely.
This intense attraction. I don't think marriage is a thing that should be rushed into.
Right.
So if your choice is, if you had to make an immediate choice between living together or you're going to get married, I don't know, just marriage should be considered. It should be taken seriously. It should be a commitment not made, rashly or without thought. And I think that some of the components that go into that are, really start with knowing yourself.
Yes.
What things do you bring to the table? What are your skills? Mm-hmm. What are your needs naturally? What things make you feel loved?
Yes.
And then once you know those things about yourself, you can sort of assess how you're a fit with the person that you're attracted to or partnering with or whatever it is. Do you guys complement one another?
Right.
Do you provide balance to each other? Do you find the things that are maybe weaknesses in your partner tolerable?
Yes.
Are they deal breakers? Some of these things are really important to consider. And I do think that maybe some of that very high divorce rate is driven by just, people who go into marriages just without considering some of these factors.
Well, self-awareness, self-knowledge is, I will tell you, I was for decades. I was literally even well into my marriage. I was not self-aware, So that's part of the problem, and a lot of that comes from therapy, etc. But most people don't make, they make decisions about getting a car or a job.
Yeah.
But something that's going to be 40 or 50 year commitment.
Sure.
It's most of us don't. That marriage is maybe the only thing that we commit to. That's that intense, emotionally, financial, and so we don't have a good way to practice for that.
Yeah.
Small things get you ready, but it's only with maturity and time are you able to say, I don't think you could have said this 6 or 8 or 10 years ago.
Right.
So you've learned it along the way, just like I had to learn it along the way, that this type of growth is extremely important, and the growth about yourself, understanding yourself, and so before you try to present yourself to somebody else.
Right, absolutely. I do think that it's certainly possible for people who get married, without considering a lot of these things up front, to still maintain a marriage and have a happy marriage along the way, and learn to do these things along the way
Most
as
of us
well
do.
too.
Right, most of us have to along the way. It's not I'm 80% of the way there. Let's just get married. I'll get to the last 20%.
Yeah.
It's I would say a lot of people are 2, 3, 5, 10% of the way about self-knowledge and stuff before they get married. Then they have to learn along the way, and I think that's part of the excitement. I mean, some people want to get married because they want to have a steady Eddie partner at dinner and
Yeah.
and whenever they go to the movies and stuff like that. A companion. It's kind of
Yeah, right.
transactional.
Transactional, sure.
Yeah. So and certainly hundreds and thousands of years ago, marriage was transactional.
Yeah.
But that's not how we do it in the United States, not in the Western cultures typically. I think that's absolutely correct, that you have to learn. And it is not just about the other person, notice, not just what their favorite food and their favorite color is, but actually recognize what the other person really is like, what comforts them, and plus you know, whenever it's in juxtaposition, what you thought you liked, and then juxtapose it to what your partner or your loved one, your spouse likes. Big difference.
I think there is some value to premarital counseling too.
Yes,
and I think so
taking seriously, not like I did where I showed up barely on time and my mind was elsewhere. But
yeah,
anyway.
I mean, and so I think the premarital counseling that Eric and I had was actually pretty long and extensive, and I'm grateful for the relationship that we built with the people doing it with us. I think all types of premarital counseling will focus on different things. Some on more like heartsy level stuff and like communication skills, and some on more nuts and bolts things. I think I was sort of the opinion that like, I really need to learn about these nuts and bolts things because these are the real things that are going to come up in my marriage, and we're going to have to deal with. I'm going to have to know what to do. I really wish I would have realized how those things will come, right? If you don't have a foundation of being able to talk to one another and listen and explain your own point of view in a way that doesn't come off accusatory to the other person, you are not going to get anywhere. You're never going to get to those practicals that they listed off that you might have to deal with about how to pay for your kids' college down the road,
You're right. Communication, which you could communicate well, right? English papers and rhetoric and all that stuff. But communication about personal stuff that's touchy, that touches at like your vulnerabilities, which is not something I was modeled for me and not something I'm good at. But I had to learn slowly, very slowly, painfully. But I would argue that that's exactly where it is. The vulnerability about being able to say it and say it without threatening other people and not feeling threatened.
Threaten yourself. Absolutely. And I think that's also a beautiful benefit of marriage too, is that when you're that close to somebody where you have that level of vulnerability, it's my therapist has referred to it as unconditional positive regard, where you just give the other person you're talking to the benefit of the doubt, right?
Yeah.
You just assume that this person's not trying to hurt me. They're not trying to trick me.
Right. They're
not trying to insult me. So I'm going to take seriously what their concerns are, and we can work together through that hardship. So that's been, I guess you would call that intimacy at some level as well too.
Sure.
I think it's a beautiful part of marriage.
I have to agree.
Yeah. Okay, so what about old age? Let's talk about being an old person. I mean, my personal opinion is I think it would be better to grow old with a spouse than to get old by myself.
Yes.
And have to rely on my friends or another community that I've built.
Well, what happens
what
is what happens, what I see with myself and my patients is that it's pretty scary to go through life, especially last part of your life, last quarter of your life. And who knows when the last half of the last quarter, you can look at retrospectively and know it was the last half of last quarter, but you may not know why you're in the throes of it. It's pretty scary to be alone. And, there's different types of alone and lonely. You can have friends and family within a few miles, et cetera, and still feel alone. So it is fairly frightening. What happens, of course, is that depression increases as we potential for depression increases as we grow older. Certainly, if you're widowed or divorced, the increased risk for alcohol and other issues, especially with men, alcohol consumption. If they have medical illnesses, loneliness and depression, and live by themselves, there's increased risk for alcoholism, for instance. But there's no doubt that as we grow older, having a marriage, something that's tried and true, it's been stable for quite a while, is something to rely on that'll extend your health and your life.
Yeah.
But it's not to negate that people with long-term relationships or partners or other families don't also help. it's a little different whenever you've shared decades with somebody who still lives with you as you grow old together.
Yeah. I mean, the whole, in sickness and in health part, I mean, obviously,
Yes.
As we age, there are
Right.
going to be sicknesses in difficult times, and having someone that not only like is able to take care of you, but can take care of you from a place of, I love you. I would lay down my life for you. That's not a kind of relationship that you're going to see as frequently, among friends or,
less likely
people
to
at
do
your
so.
church. Yeah.
The importance is, of course, also by the same token, it's not like somebody's is here to take care of me while feed me and clothe, whenever I'm demented. And all. Part of it is that you take care of yourself so that the other person does not have to, do it too early and do so much of it. So that you take care of yourself.
Thank you for saying that, and I hope my husband hears you say that.
It's all men and women. It's not just.
Yeah.
But it's a self-responsibility. By the way, we want you to have less morbidity and longer life, less mortality,
Absolutely.
less short lifespan. I'm not worried about overpopulating the earth. That's another discussion. But taking care of yourself means a big difference in terms of your ability to enjoy life together.
Oh my gosh, yeah, and your kids, your adult children's level of enjoyment as well.
And
I mean,
if you have grandkids, be able to play with them, all that stuff matters.
Yeah, for sure. What else have we? Is there anything we've missed? Anything else you want to say?
Yeah, well, like I said, I think a lot of this, the big picture items, about getting married, but also understanding that you're meeting each other at one point in your life, and you're both, and hopefully you both change and grow together as opposed to apart.
Yeah,
it's automatically going to change and grow.
Right.
It's just the question is you're going to be together so you can complement each other and support each other, or is it going to be apart where eventually it's going to say, I don't need this anymore.
Yeah.
I've grown apart from you. I don't need to, I don't care where you sleep tonight. So it's extremely important. The change is going to happen.
Right.
So that's a big deal for me. I think that's when I talk to people.
Do you think that catches people off guard?
Yeah, they're stuck. They're stuck as if why aren't they like this like they were before?
Yeah.
The answer is none of us are like we were before.
Yeah.
We have features of it. We have bits and pieces, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
So that's the part. We talked about the lack of don't assume unconditional love and stuff like that. People are going to be judging you. They're going to be critiquing you. All this stuff like that. But it comes from a place. I think part of it as we grow older, it's not automatic for a lot of us. Some people are automatically unconditional love. Is that unconditional love doesn't always mean unconditional that you're right.
Sure.
So I think there's a big difference. I think guys tend to lump things that kind of conflate everything.
Yeah.
It's like if you married me and you think I can provide for it and can help them do this, you want to have children with me, why don't you accept that I do this, that, and the other thing? Why don't you, if you accepted me for these things, why do you reject me for these other things? So I think that's some of the discussions I have with guys especially, as they're conflating things. That don't necessarily go together. And every time I talk to people, it reminds me, it's like, hey, you sometimes you've done this or you still do this.
Yeah.
And it catches me off guard when I'm like, oh, I should hear myself talk occasionally.
Yeah, I think, building good marriage, healthy marriages are very sacrificial. And it involves a lot of
way.
In a positive way. Yeah. Not
People
like
think,
not being a doormat.
Right.
But
that's an important difference.
Yeah. Just being emotionally vulnerable and open and just willing to entertain the idea of changing things about yourself or changing the way that you express yourself to your partner. I think that it challenges our sense of pride, or that I get to decide how I am and you just have to deal with it, and you're going to love me or not. That's the unconditional love piece. And I think unconditional love runs both ways.
Yes.
That do you love yourself and your lifestyle more than this other person, more than your family, more than your spouse? Or are you going to be willing to sacrifice, some of the things that may have brought you joy or whatever it is, in order to keep this healthy dynamic going? And I think that's something I've really seen in my parents, just whether it's a sacrificing of comfort or a sacrificing of how you would rather be spending your time, and all of that comes back to just the intention, of that building process throughout marriage as opposed to letting it arrive.
I totally agree. What I find with me, my wife makes fun of me because for my daughters who are adults and married, I still kind of oogle over my daughters. I'll do anything for them, blood relatives. But my wife, I'll challenge her and she'll challenge me and stuff like that. And I recognize, my daughters because of my wife. But it's interesting how the kind of blood relatives, blood is thicker than water. And for me to catch myself in that and say, hey, why, this is a big deal for Julie. And so for me to say, automatically, my kids know, they've always known that, for both their parents love them forever and ever.
Yeah.
But for me to understand that it's not, I was married only a short while before both kids came along. So for me to say, hey, there's a difference between your wife and your daughters, there should be. And now that they're out of the house and married and stuff like that, hey, this is a big deal, Chucky. So for me to be cognizant, consciously change because it is important, and I've chosen for it to be important. Not somebody told me, but I've chosen, and that's important for people to understand the difference between automatic and it works versus you've chosen and it works.
Yes,
you've chosen and worked at it hard to make it to work. Both of them get you the same place, but one of them is automatic; it was just already done, and you kind of fell into it in the groove and you just ran the race. Another one that you had to consciously do something.
I don't know if both of them get you to the same place. I don't know if I would agree with that. I mean, you have to be incredibly lucky to stumble into a beautiful long-term marriage, to just magically end up there. That would take miraculous levels of coincidence. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know anybody who's not just we're happily married, but we don't, we hang out in different rooms of the house all the time and don't really interact at all. But people who are really long-term friends and companions that enjoy each other's company and can laugh together and can meet each other's emotional needs, there is no stumbling into that. That takes grit and determination and willingness to, forgive and say sorry and improve in certain areas. So I mean, and I think it's so worthwhile too. I mean, I just think about looking at my parents and my grandparents too, that they have been through so much, they've done so much in their lives, but because they have been so intentional about investing in their relationship and building up their marriage, that they are thick as thieves, even 36 years later, best friends, confidants. They're still in love with each other. They're enamored with each other still. They're not annoyed by each other's presence and avoiding each other. I think that's beautiful to me and really something that I aspire to. And the reason why I want to keep working on the stuff along the way so that I can enjoy that.
I think you're well on your way.
Oh, well. Okay, well, did we say it all? Did we?
I think it's you could go a bunch of different directions, but I think it's so in the end, both of us have been married a while. Both of us are still going to be married.
I'd say I'm really married. We're still going to be married tomorrow.
That's right. And I want to tell I love you to Julianne Tadros, my wife of 30 years, and Abby Marie Ellison, who's been married now a month, and her husband Andrew Ellison. I love you too, and my baby girl Elise Noel Dunn and her husband Ryan Dunn. They got married first, and they showed us how they showed Abby how to do it right, and Andrew. So it was what a blessing.
That's precious. Well, I love you, Eric Michael Diedrichson, and I love that our love is gonna have a new family member in the spring. So dropping that on the pod. Vanessa's pregnant.
All right, there she is. She said it. It's real.
She said it. Yeah. And I'm so grateful. I'm really, really grateful for the examples of my parents and grandparents and other, married people that I know. I think that it certainly makes it much easier to commit to this process of being married and growing together when you've seen lots of other people do it and knowing that you can do it too. So thank you for all of you long married people that have set great examples for us.
Thank you to my mom and dad that showed how they could immigrate with 3 young boys and make a big success out of all sorts of things that they've never lived long enough to see. But it's we have witnesses.
Absolutely. All right. So if you want to get a hold of us and tell us how wrong we are about this whole marriage thing and absolutely hand it to us, We would love your feedback, and we would love to be set straight. You can reach us at notyourdocpod@gmail.com. That is notyourdocpod@gmail.com. We are so grateful that you listen. We're going to bring you more medical and non-medical topics along the way. Mm-hmm. Thanks so much for doing this with me, Dr. Tadros. I love talking about these things with you.
Tough topics that are very common and I think affect us every day. So yeah. Good. Thank you very much. Thanks for doing the point counterpoint with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And Seth suggested that we make this into a series, so there will be more point counterpoint to come as we disagree on our podcast.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks, Vanessa.
Thanks, y'all. We'll see ya.
This previous podcast represents my opinions and the opinions of my guests. This is not medical advice, and I'm not establishing a physician-patient relationship with any listener. The content here should not be taken as medical advice. The content here is for informational purposes only, and because each patient is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions that you may have.